Minecraft is an incredible sandbox game, where the only limit to what you can create is your imagination. The game's array of features has grown tremendously since its first release back in 2011. From new friendly and hostile mobs, to an updated hunger and combat system, and even whole other dimensions that you can travel to and explore, the game really has evolved in some amazing ways. In this video, we're going to be ignoring basically all of that. Before we get started, I want to preface this by saying that I'm just going to be talking about how I make Noteblock songs and the reasoning behind it. From songs to soundtracks or jingles, the way you approach building with Noteblocks really depends on what type of music you want to make. I'm going to explain how I try to recreate pop or rock songs or other similar music, but these techniques can also apply to other styles of music. Also, there are definitely other videos out there that talk about how to make Noteblock songs, so if you're looking for something a bit different, or maybe just more concise, I'll link a few that I thought were helpful in the description below. The methods I'm going to be explaining in this video are just about how to make Noteblock songs in vanilla Minecraft without using mods or world generation tools, which is kind of for two reasons. The first reason is that I don't use these kinds of tools myself because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I think the way I use now lets me fine-tune things as much or as little as I want. The second is because I want to make this guide helpful for anyone who doesn't want to deal with installing things besides the base game. Also, I will be explaining everything in terms of Job Edition, since I think Bedrock Edition is absolutely terrible. Lastly, as a quick disclaimer, this video is going to use a lot of simple math to explain why certain things need to be done in a specific way. I get that not everyone is a nerd like me who finds underlying mathematical patterns and things interesting, so feel free to skip ahead if my explanations start to get too boring. With all of that out of the way, let's get started. Obviously, the first step to creating a song in Minecraft Noteblock is to pick a song to create. Now you may be thinking, that seems pretty straightforward. Can't I just pick any song I like and get started? No, of course not. There are actually multiple limitations for picking a song that can be made with Noteblock. To understand what they are and why, we're going to need to take a step back and look at how music and Minecraft mechanics intersect. In music, the speed of the music is called the tempo. The tempo will be written at the start of a piece of music like this, where it shows a number equal to a music note. Now, there are many kinds of music notes, and the value of some of them depends on the time signature of the song, but a large majority of pop songs use 4/4 time signature, which is also called common time, so I'm going to explain things assuming that we're always using that time signature. This is a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, an eighth note, and a 16th note. Half notes are half as long as whole notes, quarter notes are half as long as half notes, and so on, down to 16th notes. This process of splitting a note into smaller notes that add up to the same length is called subdivision. If you like math, you can think of it like fractions of a note, where a whole note is equal to 1. If you don't like math, you can think of it like the different ways of measuring time on a clock. Like how hours can be broken down into minutes and seconds, a whole note can be broken down into halves, quarters, eighths, and 16ths. Technically, you can subdivide past 16th notes, but that almost never happens. To bring this back to tempo, when listening to a song, you can kind of feel the pulse of the music, usually in the bass or the drums, like a heartbeat. This pulse is typically on the quarter notes, which is why you can often count to 4 with the beat of a song and it lines up well. This is reflected in sheet music by the number equal to a quarter note, which tells us how many quarter notes there are per minute. So, for example, if it says 150 equal to a quarter note, then there are 150 quarter notes each minute. This is also known as the BPM, or beats per minute, of a song. Quick aside before all the music theory nerds come to correct me, tempo and BPM are not exactly the same thing, but for the rest of this, I'm going to use them interchangeably, because for our purposes, they are functionally the same. Now, to understand why this number matters, we're going to need to understand how Minecraft works. In Minecraft, actions that happen in the game need to be able to happen at almost any moment. The way the game handles this is by repeatedly refreshing to process the progress of things that happen in the game. This refresh is called a game tick, and it happens 20 times per second. So one game tick is equal to 0.05 seconds. Redstone is a wiring system that players can use in the game to control the activation of blocks that can be powered by redstone. There's redstone wire and repeaters that can even be used to control the flow and timing of redstone circuits. Luckily for us, note blocks are redstone activatable, which means it's a perfect system for us to use to turn note blocks into songs. Well, almost perfect. You see, redstone uses a different timing system than game ticks, which is called redstone ticks. One redstone tick is equivalent to 2 game ticks, so that means one redstone tick is 0.1 seconds. This may not seem like that big of a deal, but it has a huge impact on what songs can be made with note blocks. So, you may have already noticed where this whole explanation is heading, but just to make it clear, the tempo of a song is the main factor in determining if a song works in Minecraft note blocks, because the redstone tick rate limits how fast note blocks can be played. The next part of this is to figure out what tempos can work with the redstone tick rate. To do this, we need to figure out how many seconds each beat is, and then check if that can be recreated using redstone ticks that are 0.1 seconds long. This is where the real math begins. The tempo represents the beats per minute, so we can rewrite it as beats divided by minutes. For example, let's take the tempo of 150 again, and rewrite it like so. Next, we know that there are 60 seconds in 1 minute, so we can just substitute it. This tells us how many beats there are per second. However, to know how many seconds there are per beat, we just need to take the reciprocal and simplify. Or, in other words, swap the top and bottom numbers and plug it into a calculator. Ta-da! Now we know that at 150 beats per minute, each beat will be 0.4 seconds long. This means that a tempo of 150 can easily be recreated by redstone ticks, and to do so, we just need to use 4 redstone ticks for each beat. So that's it, this tempo works now, right? Well, not quite. In almost all music, quarter notes won't be the shortest type of note used, so unless you're only making really simple songs like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, then you need to check if the beats can be subdivided by redstone. For the example tempo of 150 that we were just talking about, the 4 redstone ticks per quarter note can be split into 2 redstone ticks per 8th note, or 1 redstone tick per 16th note. So, a song that has 150 BPM can be made from note blocks even if it uses 8th notes and 16th notes. Instead of walking you through the calculations to find other tempos repeatedly, here's a list of a fairly wide range of tempos that work this way. Feel free to do the math on your own and verify that this is accurate though. Now, looking at this table, it seems like the options are pretty limited. You may be thinking, it sure would open up so many more options if there was some way to use half a redstone tick. And lucky for you, there is a block that can do just that. Introducing the piston. Pistons are a block in Minecraft that push out from one face when powered by a redstone signal, allowing them to move an adjacent block. The important part here is that it takes 3 game ticks, or 1.5 redstone ticks, for the piston to finish its movement. This means we can use it to make a note block play with a half of a redstone tick delay. Usually, I do this by using a sticky piston to push a redstone block next to a note block, but it can also be done the other way around. It's important to use sticky pistons though, so the block gets retracted and can be played again. Also, when using pistons for specific delays in a song, be sure to completely turn down the blocks in the sound setting, or you'll hear a bunch of pistons moving and it'll drown out the note blocks. So now, we can update the table with these new options. In general, using pistons makes things pretty complicated to build, since if you want to put a half tick delay, then you need to start the piston 1 redstone tick early, and it takes up much more space than just a note block, so I try to avoid using them whenever possible. This means that tempos like 75, 150, and 100 are the easiest to work with. Now, there's one last thing to talk about when it comes to viable tempos: swung versus straight notes. Usually, all of the notes of the same type will have the same length, which is referred to as straight notes. So if every 8th note is played the same, like this, then the notes are called straight notes. But sometimes, songs will make it so the first note is a little bit longer than the second note in each pair of the same notes, like this. These are called swung notes. Swing is usually associated with jazz music, where it's a much more common occurrence, but there are some instances of swing being used in pop music as well. In the table, you may realize that there are ways to break down the listed shortest type of note into smaller swung versions. For example, even though the tempo of 120 can only play straight 8th notes that are 0.25 seconds each, it can play swung 16th notes, where the first 16th note is 0.15 seconds and the second 16th note is 0.1 seconds. This isn't always applicable since it's more common for pop songs to not be swung, but even still, you can sometimes sneak in a few swung notes as long as they aren't consecutive, and it will be hard to hear the difference. Like I said before, tempos close to 75, 150, or 100 are the easiest to work with. Unfortunately, many pop songs fall somewhere between 100 and 150, so it's often hard to get the tempo just right. There's no definitive way to tell if a song is close enough to one of the tempo breakpoints for you to make it, it's just your own discretion. My ballpark is usually within roughly 10 beats per minute or so, but it depends on the song. If you don't care that a song sounds slower or faster than it normally would, then just go ahead and build it at the closest tempo. It's often close enough to where no one really notices the difference until they compare it to the actual thing. Hello, Editing Ethan here. It has come to my attention that the entire previous section has become largely irrelevant since the release of Minecraft version 1.20.3 in December 2025. So, allow me to correct the record here with some new information. In version 1.20.3, a new command, tick, was added to the game, which allows you to change the tick rate of the game when used like this. This means, with the help of this command, we can now functionally create a song at any tempo without the restrictions described before. Previously, there was no way to play note blocks at a speed faster than the default tick rate, which is 1/20th of a second. But now, we can just build a song at an easy to work with tempo and calculate the tick rate needed to adjust the tempo accordingly. You may be wondering, how do we calculate the necessary tick rate? Well, let's dive into some more math. Because we want to adjust the tick rate proportionally to the change in tempo, we know that the ratio of the original tick rate to the original BPM needs to be the same as the ratio of the new tick rate to the new BPM, so we can set up our equation like this. Then, we simply need to multiply both sides by the new BPM to isolate the new tick rate. And now, we have an equation to calculate the new tick rate. Just to make things clear, let's take a look at an example. Let's say we want to create a song with a tempo of 132 beats per minute. First, we can build the song at 150 BPM by using 4 redstone ticks as a quarter note. Then, we can calculate the new tick rate with our equation. The original tick rate will always be 20, because that's still the default tick rate in Minecraft. The original BPM will be 150, since that's the tempo we built our song at. Finally, to get the tick rate for a tempo of 132, we can use that number here and plug it all into a calculator. This shows us that in this case, the tick rate should be changed to 17.6 to adjust the tempo from 150 to 132. Now, let's suppose instead that we decided to build our song at a tempo of 100, with 6 redstone ticks being a quarter note. In that case, we can recalculate the new tick rate by replacing the original BPM in the equation like so. So in this scenario, we would need to increase the tick rate to 26.4 to adjust the tempo from 100 to 132. In summary, with the tick command, any tempo can be built in-game without any real restrictions, so the point made in the previous part of the video has been almost completely deprecated. I'm still going to leave it in though, since the part explaining tempo is good, and I think it's nice to keep the old explanation for how tempo-limited note block songs around for posterity. Also, I really don't want to waste all the editing I did for it. Anyways, back to your regularly scheduled note block guide. Bye! Now that we know what tempos are possible, there's one more limiting factor to consider: the pitch range. When you place a note block on certain other blocks, it will change the instrument the note block plays. Here is a list of all the different types of note block instruments. Wait a second. What the heck is that? Future Ethan here again. It took me too long to edit the video, so the 26.1 update will already be out by the time you're seeing this. This update adds the trumpet note block instrument, which is played by placing a note block on a copper block. I know everyone has been talking about the baby chicken, but the trumpet note block is by far the best part of the update for me. Why didn't you pause the video this time? I didn't want to reuse the same joke. Anyways, I gotta go finish editing. Bye! Okay then, back to note block instruments, I guess. Each note block instrument covers a 2-octave range from F sharp to F sharp, with certain instruments covering higher or lower pitches depending on the type. If you don't know what that means, here's a very oversimplified explanation. There are 7 letter notes, A through G, that go in order, with A being lower and G being higher. There's also a note between each of them, except for these 2 pairs. Don't bother asking me why, because I have no idea. These between notes are referred to as sharp or flat. Sharp meaning slightly higher, and flat meaning slightly lower. For example, the note between A and B would be slightly higher than A, but slightly lower than B, so it could be called A sharp or B flat. Even though this note has 2 names, it doesn't really matter which one you use since they're both referring to the same pitch. Music theorists will tell you that the name does matter, since you can't replace an A sharp in a chord with a B flat, but they both sound the same, so it doesn't really matter for our purposes. This makes a total of 12 notes, but obviously, there are more than 12 notes, so when you go above or below this range, you just copy and paste these 12 notes again above or below, and now they represent a different range of pitches. So, there will be multiple notes with the same name, and the range from one note to the next one with the same name is called an octave. Like I said before, this whole explanation is extremely oversimplified and probably triggered all the music theory nerds out there, but basically some note block instruments can play high notes, some can play low notes, and some are somewhere in the middle. Each of these instruments only has a range of 25 notes, which can be tricky to work with for some songs. Here's a quick rundown of what I generally use each instrument type for in a song. Sand, snare, glass, hat, and stone, bass drum. These 3 are percussion sounds, so it's pretty straightforward. Stone is basically always the bass drum, but sometimes I use the higher pitched notes of it as toms or timpani. I usually use the lower glass register to mimic clapping, and for sand, the lower register is a snare drum, while I find that the highest note makes a decent hi-hat. Wood, bass, and pumpkin, didgeridoo. These both cover the lowest register, so I almost always use them for the bass. Wood gives off more of an acoustic sound, so it makes a pretty good acoustic bass or bass guitar. Pumpkin sounds a lot dirtier, so it works well if you're going for a more electronic or blown out effect. Wool, guitar. This is usually used for an acoustic guitar, obviously, but sometimes if the vocal part is in a low enough octave, I'll use it for that instead. Emerald block, bit. This one works well as a slightly higher range guitar, or any 8-bit synth sound, obviously. Sometimes it can be used for a vocal part if needed, but I don't prefer it normally. Glowstone, plink. This is one that I usually use for vocal parts because it's relatively smooth sounding, while still being loud enough to cut through other sounds. It can also make a good electronic piano or keyboard sound. Hay block, banjo. This one is okay at replicating higher electric guitar pitches, but I don't really like using it because it's a little too plucky, usually. It also sounds like a banjo, obviously, but that isn't very commonly used in pop music. Iron block, iron xylophone. This one is also kinda sharp like the hay block, so I find it harder to use. If there is a marimba or xylophone part, it's good for that, obviously. And I've also used the lower register of it for drums that needed to sound pitched as well. Bone block, xylophone. This one is basically the same as the iron block, just higher pitched and with slightly less ring to it. This makes it pretty tricky to use as well, unless something uses a really short, plinky sound. Soul sand, cowbell. This one is kinda like the iron block, but lower pitched. I haven't used it too often though, since it sounds a bit clunky. Clay, flute. This sound is very good for vocal parts that are higher pitched, or whistling or synth parts. I've also found that it's very good for playing background chords, since it's not too overwhelming. Gold block, bell. This one I usually use for high-pitched piano parts or really high whistling/synth parts. It also is good for the bells, obviously, since it has a nice ring to it, but this sound is a bit less common. Packed ice, chime. This sound is also a good way to make really high whistling or synth parts. Its pitch can sound slightly off sometimes though, especially in chords, so I don't use this one as often. Other, harp. This one I mainly just use for replicating acoustic piano. It's not too overwhelming though, so it makes good background chords or harmony vocal parts as well. Copper block, trumpet. Since this is new, I haven't tested it out much yet, but I suspect it will be good for mid-range chords, like the harp note block, just with more volume and a brass-like sound. This is probably the same for the other variations of trumpet as well. Only using 2 octaves can be kinda limiting, so sometimes if a part needs to go above or below the limit, then I use another similar instrument to extend the range. Here are some examples of the instruments I use to extend each other's range. The pitch range is not a hard limit like the tempo is. Not many songs have extreme pitch ranges that go beyond 2 to 3 octaves, and even if a song does, then you can usually find a creative way to work around it. I don't usually treat this aspect like a restriction on what songs to make, but I do try to decide which note block instruments will correspond to which musical element before I start building, even if I end up changing that later. One last thing before we move on from note blocks. You probably already noticed, but when powered, note blocks just play their sound once, with no way to extend the length of the note. Even though you can't make a note block play for longer, when you play the same note repeatedly in a row, your brain can kind of fill in the gaps and interpret it like one continuous note. This works better for some instrument types, like flute, harp, and bass, which is why you might notice that I use those instruments often. World generation tools for note block songs, like Noteblock Studio, don't have ways to extend notes built into them, which is one of the reasons I dislike them. The other reason is that they build the note blocks in a way that makes the surround sound turn out all wonky, but that's neither here nor there. So now, we've established the parameters for a good note block song. Once you pick a song, I highly recommend you find sheet music for it. It's much faster to build the song with sheet music as a reference, instead of trying to do it by ear, while you're building it in-game. Trust me, I've tried. I think it also helps it sound better too, when you have sheet music or a MIDI file as a guide to follow. However, I would also recommend being ready to make adjustments on the fly if something sounds off. Note blocks aren't perfect, so blindly following sheet music won't always end with the best results. The music I use for my songs are either arrangements I made by ear, or arrangements I found online and then tweaked a little bit. There are a lot of really good arrangements out there, but there's almost always a part that I think is missing from it or sounds different in the original song. Even when I'm making my own arrangements for songs, it's very helpful to find ones online to use as a starting point. MuseScore and Noteflight are good resources for finding arrangements that are free. The only downside is that many songs are paywalled or blocked due to copyright, or some just haven't been created yet since they're more obscure. If I can't find sheet music online to help me write my arrangements, then I'll see if I can find a chord progression or guitar tabs for the song to use as a starting point instead. I write my arrangements in an app called Medley, which is free on the App Store. The free version is pretty bad for making actual songs because 90% of the instruments on it are locked behind a paywall, but I think this actually makes it good for writing note block arrangements. The fact that it restricts what instruments you can use is similar to how few options there are in note blocks. It's pretty intuitive to use the app itself, and it's hard to explain all the details on how to use it, but an important thing to note is that I always change the key to F sharp and expand the full chromatic scale to see all of the notes. This way, it shows all the notes and highlights F sharp, so it's easy to see the upper and lower bound of each note block's range. You can assign different instruments in the app to correlate to different note block instruments, however you think sounds best. I don't think I'm qualified to do a very detailed explanation of music theory, since I don't really understand it myself. The two most important things to learn if you want to arrange songs, though, is how to read sheet music and how basic chords work. I'll link to some resources that explain some of these in the description below. Once you've got a song you want to make and some form of sheet music for it, the last step is to actually build it in the game. The most important part for building it is how you structure the redstone signal to power the blocks. The redstone signal needs to be able to activate the notes in the right order and be flexible enough to play lots of different rhythms. The structure I use is 5 blocks wide and puts the redstone repeaters in a snaking S-shaped pattern. There are a couple of benefits to this. First, this structure lets you put a lot of 1-tick delay repeaters consecutively, so you can easily create different rhythms. Second, since it snakes back and forth, even though it has a lot of short 1-tick delays, it doesn't move so fast that you can't keep up with it. Lastly, there is still room on the sides to make it so 2 note blocks can be powered by the redstone line, since the redstone signal can power blocks adjacent to the one being directly powered. The one downside is that the spot inside the curve can't be used because when it tries to power it on the top of the track, the signal on the bottom of the curve will still be active. I call this structure the note block track. A note block song is made up of a bunch of note block tracks that all play at the same time. Each track can be used to play different parts for different instruments. It's important that each track gets started at the same time, or if you start a new track mid-song, then it lines up with the tracks that are already playing. Also, since Minecraft has surround sound, I usually put a copy of each track on both sides so the audio is balanced between both ears. Some of my earlier covers didn't do this, and if you listen with earbuds or headphones, you can hear different tracks coming from different sides, which I find kind of jarring. It's neat to use this effect intentionally though, like in Thanks for the Memories, but it's fairly rare for this to be applicable. Another important note is that it's better to leave a space between the tracks so there's room to add pistons without tracks accidentally powering each other and desyncing. This space is also where I put measure and beat markers. It's helpful to use a distinct block to mark the start of each beat, and another type of block to mark which beat is the start of a new measure. It makes it much easier to keep track of where you are in the music when there are reference points. That just about covers the basics of turning songs into note block covers. So, before I wrap up the video, I want to cover a couple of slightly more advanced tricks that you can use to speed up the process. All of these tips are going to be using commands to help you speed up the process of building the song in-game. Commands are part of vanilla Minecraft, but you do need to be careful when using some of them, since there's no easy way to undo them if you make a typo. On the bright side, they can significantly reduce the amount of legwork you have to put in, and they have become more user-friendly over time with things like autofill. If you don't feel confident using commands though, you can just ignore this section. Before you can use commands, you need to make sure you have commands enabled on your world via the Allow Cheats option. What's that? But the script says... Well, when did they change that? You mean I've been procrastinating on recording this for that long? Man, time flies. Oh, right, the video. Where was I? Right, so you need to make sure you have commands enabled on your world via the Allow Commands option. This setting is configured when you first create the world and can't be changed after that. If you have a world without commands enabled that you want to use them in, there is a workaround for it. Once you've entered into the world, you can go to the menu and open the world to LAN and turn on the Allow Commands option from there. There are two commands that can significantly help speed up the process of creating songs: fill and clone. The fill command is used to fill an area with a type of block, and requires 3 inputs, 2 sets of coordinates, and 1 block name. The coordinates should be opposite corners of the rectangular prism that will be filled with the specific block. One common use of this command is to fill the section under a track with a block to change the instrument type. This command can also take another input in addition to the 3 mentioned before, the word replace, and another block name. This makes it so the fill command will only replace the second block type with the first block type inside the rectangular prism, instead of filling the entire area. This version of the command is very useful for replacing a lot of note blocks tuned to one note with note blocks tuned to a different note, or replacing redstone dust in an unused track. It can save a lot of time by automating the process of manually replacing or placing the same note repeatedly. The clone command is used to copy the blocks in one area to another, and it takes 3 sets of coordinates as its inputs. The first 2 sets of coordinates should be opposite corners of the rectangular prism that you want to copy. The third corner will be the lowest northwestern corner of the rectangular prism that you want to clone to. The lowest northwestern corner is also the coordinate with the lowest, most negative, values, if that makes it any easier to remember. This command will most often be used to copy tracks or measures. I'll use it to copy empty tracks so I don't have to rebuild new measures, and to copy measures for a melody that gets repeated. To use these commands effectively, you should also open the F3 overlay that shows the coordinates of the block you are looking at and the direction you're facing. This will let you easily figure out what coordinates to use for the clone and fill commands. Another useful part of this overlay is that it shows the note that a note block is tuned to when you look at it. This lets you quickly check that the note block is set correctly, since there isn't a way to tell just by looking at it normally. Okay, so I'm going to try and do a quick-ish unscripted demo where I make the first 8 measures of the next note block song I'm working on. This might get kind of rambly because I'm not going off a script, but I'll try my best to edit it down. So first, let's take a look at the note block track. As you can see, I said I'm going to make 8 measures, but clearly there's more than 8 measures. That's because I usually like to leave some empty measures at the end so I can clone them forward without having to remove all the note blocks I was already working on, especially if the rhythm changes. Also, you can see I'm using these sea lanterns to mark the start of each measure, and these black concrete to mark each beat. The song is going to be in 3/4 time signature, which means that there's 3 quarter notes in each measure. One last thing before we get started, you need to make sure to turn commands on. And you can see over here on the side, oops. You can see over here on the side, there's this command block that has a teleport command, which I can use to teleport to the start of the song. Inside of here, you can see that that pressure plate will activate this redstone signal, which starts all the tracks at the same time. And these additional tracks on the side here are built in a way that they will play at the exact same pace as these ones that were hooked up to the start over there. Alright, so with that preamble out of the way, let's get started with building. So you can see in the music here, there's roughly 6-ish parts for the first 8 measures. It looks a little bit weird because the app only lets you write in 4/4, so the way I had to do it was put 6 measures of 4/4 and treat it as 8 measures of 3/4. A bit strange, I know, but it's the best I could work with in this app. I'm going to start with this bottom part here, which is like a marimba part, which I'll be building on the iron block. So, here we go. Well, edit this part out. So you can see I skipped this first measure. I just wanted to use it to give space for this part to line up without having to awkwardly try and connect it through the side here. One last thing before we start building, F3 menu. This way we can see what each note block is tuned to on the left over here. See, this one is 0, which is the low F sharp. We want to start on a D sharp, so that would be 9. And then we continue from there. And that should be the first 8 measures or so. So now, let's take a listen, just to make sure I didn't miss any of the notes, or put the wrong note. So there we go, that's the first part. Now, let's move on to the bass, which is this one up here. So that's the bass part. Let's take a listen to make sure it sounds correct. Seems good. Next, let's move on to the drums. Now, instead of repeating that all the way down, I'm going to use the clone command to make this a bit easier. To see the targeted block here and the targeted block here, we'll use those as our clone for the first measure. And then we need to pick the northwesternmost corner, which is just the most negative. And now we can repeat that down the line to fill in the other measures. Since the drums takes up 2 tracks, we can't really listen to them both at the same time. But they're also pretty simple here, so there's not much to test. Now, let's move on to these other 2 parts at the beginning. So there's that line done. Let's take a listen. Sounds good. So now let's listen to both of those tracks together. Not bad, a little bit choppy. We might change the instrument later. Now, time for the final part. The melody that begins right at the end of the intro. Now that that's all done, we could listen to it all together. However, you may have noticed, if you know what song this is, that the tempo sounds off. So let's plug in the correct tempo into our equation from earlier and figure out what the tick rate needs to be adjusted to. Alright, to get the correct tempo, we need to adjust the tick rate to about 24.6. So now, let's give it a listen. Pretty good. One last thing. You can see I only built it on one side. That's because we can use the clone command to clone it over to the other side. So let me do that real quick, and then we can give it one more listen. Alright, now the tracks should be playing on both sides, so let's give it one more listen. Pretty good. That's it for the demo. But basically, repeat this process for the rest of the song, based off the sheet music. So, to quickly recap, the steps I follow to make Noteblock songs are: 1. Pick a song with a good tempo, close to 75, 150, or 100 preferably. Don't listen to him. 1. Pick any song you want, then arrange it for one of those tempos, and calculate the tick rate adjustment needed to play it at the correct tempo. 2. Decide which Noteblock instruments you want to correspond to different parts in the song. 3. Make or find an arrangement of the song. 4. Build the Noteblock tracks in the game. With these 4 steps, you can now make Noteblock songs just like I do. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of this video. I hope it wasn't too boring or hard to follow, and that it helps you out in some way if you're trying to make Noteblock songs too. Thanks for checking out the stuff I post here. I really appreciate all of your support, and have fun making Noteblock songs. Bye!